Hello and welcome to Leadership Ripples with Leah Fink. Every action that you take as a leader has a ripple effect, impacting not only your team and your organization, but also even into people's personal lives. On this show, we use examples from leaders just like yourself so we can learn from them, grow, and ultimately make sure that we're creating the kind of ripples that we want. If you are watching the show and we're live, please feel free to comment and ask questions. Even if you're watching this and we are no longer live, if you want to comment and leave your questions, I would love to get back to you. If you've been enjoying the show, I would also really appreciate it if you could hop on your favorite podcast app. You'll find the description for that, and you'll find the link for that in the description below, and leave a quick rating or review as it really helps us with the show. Today, we are going to be talking about mental health, and specifically how hard it is when you're tired about talking about mental health in the workplace all the time. And instead of a specific question or story that was shared with me, I was speaking with a leader and talking about the work I do, about elevating mental health in the workplace. He didn't want to share specifically, but said that I could use this example. He said he was so tired of conversations about mental health. It's just brought up way too much at work. It didn't seem to help employees, and they just ended up thinking more about how they weren't doing well. Now, I really wanted to share this example as I think it's so relevant and a really real experience for a lot of leaders. I think a lot of people are struggling with this discussion. And for anyone who's experiencing that right now, you are not the only one. It's a really natural concern and a real challenge. So please be kind to yourself as you consider this. So let's look at this. I'm first going to add that we're talking today about overall mental well being in the workplace. If you have staff that are diagnosed with a mental illness, that's requiring some other specific pieces that you are going to have to deal with within your workplace. And so we're not talking about diagnosis specific support. We're talking about that overall mental well being when I use the term mental health. Because mental health, first of all, is this new topic in the workplace. If you went back 20, 30 years ago, you would have barely heard the words mental health, let alone have been expected to support it in a leadership role. Maybe there was discussion around stress or around being healthy in general, but we really didn't talk about mental health. So leaders, and especially experienced leaders, have had to adapt to this shift in now you need to talk about it, and you might not feel equipped to address it at all, or you're tired of addressing it again and again. Because it's not only, of course, the rhetoric around these changes, but in addition to this, we had the circumstances of COVID-19 that brought mental health to the forefront of everyone's minds in this really big way. Because a lot of people would have previously said maybe they didn't have any mental health concerns, or maybe people had some, but they were not as worried about it. You wouldn't have seen it in the workplace. And suddenly there was this huge change. Suddenly people didn't have the resources that they had. They couldn't see the people that supported them. They couldn't do the activities they loved. All of these pieces, they couldn't even plan what was going to happen within the next year because things kept changing so much. And all of those pieces took a huge toll on people, on their mental health. And so suddenly this topic arose because not just one person with maybe mental illness was struggling, but all these people were suddenly talking about mental health and how stressed and concerned they were. So of course, workplaces had to respond. You wanted to keep your employees. You needed to get things done. You didn't want to lose everyone in the middle of this. And so you need to speak to these challenges. And for a lot of people, while there was this shutdown during COVID-19, there was an understanding that you need to step up more to support staff. Everyone was stressed, and it was probably felt like a burden that you were extra stressed during that time dealing with it. And there was also, I think, a bit of an expectation that once COVID is done, once we're past this phase in the world, things will calm down. We won't need to talk about this so much anymore. But after COVID-19, people were still talking about mental health. Maybe their situations were less extreme, but the conversations continued. And that's both because there are some real long-term impacts that people are still experiencing, still healing from that shutdown, everything that entailed. But also there's this piece of once there's space in a workplace, in any situation, to bring this really real part up, you want to continue to do so. People kind of like that ability. Because it's not only just sharing how you are struggling, which can be a powerful thing, but also having it heard and acknowledged by leaders, by the workplace. That's really powerful. It gives this sense for people that someone cares about them. Now, of course, on the flip side of this, when those conversations were stopped or trivialized or tokenized, people feel a loss of care. And not that there isn't care, but they may no longer experience it when we start to shift that discussion, if we want to just shut down this discussion. Again, this is all hard on leaders. You're generally not going to be trained in this. In many cases, your role wasn't built to accommodate the extra time or effort you might need to put in now to support the staff team. And this is one of the reasons it's so important that leadership roles are well considered. So they include things about how much percent of your time you can use supporting staff in different ways, because that should be a big part of any leadership role. And also that hopefully the messaging from the top of the organization is sharing that it's okay to prioritize this within your role. That top level of leadership is valuing employees and their health. And so different levels of supervision are all saying, yes, this is something I want to support and can support. And this is the resources I have. I know I have these resources to do so, whether that's time, whether that's money, whatever it is, that you have that support. We're going to shift a little bit now. We're talked about all these challenges and why it's kind of here. And one of the things I also hear is this idea that when you open a discussion, there's space, obviously, to both have positive and negative impacts. And the more we focus on something, the more real it is. And I think that there can be an effect where when we take on something as this kind of identity, or we take on this mentality of kind of being victims, when we hear we should be suffering from something. And a lot of people, I think, see mental health this way. If we focus on it too much, it will grow. Everyone will talk about mental health. Everyone will have worse mental health by talking about it. Not to say that that's true or not true, just we have to be aware that that's a lot of people's perspectives, and there might be a component of it that the more we talk, the more it brings. But what do we do with all of this? The thing you don't want to do is end the discussion. You don't want to say, hey, we've talked too much about this. We're trying to address it, so just stop talking. That's not going to serve. And there's way too much rhetoric about mental health in the workplace that this isn't going to serve you or your organization. But let's focus this into 3 areas that you can address. And the first is, of course, there's a personal accountability for mental health. Everyone has their own challenges, and everyone's responsible for what they're doing in their lives to help mitigate those challenges and still take care of themselves. We don't want to lose that area when we're thinking about people in the workplace, because we want to foster this empowerment, this self-efficacy, that people can support their mental health, that they can get past challenges. So having discussions with individuals or with your team that really helps them understand some of these components, how they could be caring for themselves, and sharing the resources, things like benefits that your organization might offer, that will help them on that personal level. Flip side of this, unfortunately, our society tends to focus a lot on individualism. And it's much easier, of course, also for organizations to place the entire onus of mental health onto the employee. So, for example, I'll hear from staff how the company noticed everyone in the organization was feeling stressed. So they had someone come in to speak about anxiety, and they talked about what it was, and they gave some tips for how you can not be anxious, and especially not be anxious at work. But the workplace itself was contributing to all those staff being stressed. They were stressed because of the circumstance. And so now the onus, though, is put entirely on them to not be stressed, to not be anxious. And so we want to make sure that we're balancing this. We want to have those conversations about what you're responsible for yourself for mental health, but also look at this bigger picture. Moving on to the second area, something that will also help with this is having really clearly defined structures and boundaries in your workplace. It creates a lot of stress for leaders and teams when there's uncertainty. Black and white is really nice. And this is one space where you can be a little bit more black and white in order to have more flexibility. Because sometimes you do have people who are really struggling, and that can be hard both on the leader and on the team. And there can feel a sense of inequality, or that things aren't fair, or that people are working much harder to accommodate this. And there might be some simple things that you can shift that would actually help with that. Ironically, the clearer you are on your boundaries, the more space it gives you to support someone. So, for example, a common boundary in the workplace would be that someone needs to work X number of hours per week. Now, you can think of what part of that boundary really matters to you, and where do you have flexibility in addressing it. Maybe you can be open to people deciding what hours during the week they work. Is it weeknights? Is it weekdays? Is it part on weekends? Or if you have to have a specific required set of hours, maybe they can have more say over their schedule to determine which kind of tasks they do at what time. Maybe it's even that you look at task-based instead of hour-based work. There's a lot of ways that when you're really clear on what's important and what you require from staff or what you really expect, then you have all this different space to play in it and to really have these discussions about how people can be best served. I know certainly of experiences of staff who were very stressed, having a really hard time in the workplace. They had some of these conversations and suddenly they were able to step into roles where they were not previously having success. And in this discussion, as we start talking about all these options and as we start looking now at some of the structures of the workplace, that really brings up this third area. And I believe this is where you have the most influence as a leader. It is so critical to do. Let's look at the workplace and what kind of environment you're creating for your staff. Because when people talk about mental health in the workplace, what they're really saying is that there is stress in this environment that they are having a hard time dealing with. And this is 100% to your benefit to change this. If you are tired of talking about mental health, the way that you can reframe this discussion is, how can I make my workplace more effective and successful? That is honestly basically the same thing people are asking when they're talking about mental health. How so? So the Mental Health Commission of Canada did a lot of research on what makes a psychologically healthy and safe workplace, aka a mentally healthy workplace. Do you know what they found? They found that all of the factors that build success for the organization were also critical for employee mental health. So how leaders communicated, what the culture was like, how engaged people are, the roles, responsibilities, and expectations, what the organizational boundaries were. All of those kinds of things came into play. Those are things that create more success for the organization. They actually make your job easier when they're in a good state, that you spend less time thinking about all of these. And to quote their report, workplaces with a positive approach to psychological health and safety are better able to recruit and retain talent, have improved employee engagement, enhance productivity, and are more creative and innovative, and have higher profit levels. Other positive impacts include a reduction of several key workplace issues, including the risk of conflict, grievances, turnover, disability, injury rates, absenteeism, and performance or morale problems. I'm guessing those are probably all things you want in your organization. So when your employees bring up mental health, hopefully this is a bit of a different way that you can look at it. You can look at all the benefits that you could have if you can address some of these bigger workplace issues. And if you're curious about how your organization can do that work to become more successful, please get in touch with me. I do workplace mental health assessments that will look at all these factors and help you learn where you can be focusing your energy so you can be making the changes you need to. And you'll find that once that energy is focused, those changes are made, suddenly the talk about mental health isn't quite the same. You don't need to be going into all these pieces because you've really fixed some of those underlying issues. As a reminder to all our listeners, if you have a great story or question that you'd like to share with the show, we would love to have it. You can find the link for that in the description below. And as a thank you for that, I follow up with a session to make sure all your questions are answered and just to say thank you for contributing. If you prefer to listen to this in podcast form, that comes out on Friday mornings, and you can also find the link for that in the description. And I want to thank you so much for listening and learning with me. I understand that these discussions can be hard and feel overwhelming sometimes with how much they come up. So thank you for still taking the time to consider them. And as we close, remember to ask yourself, what ripples am I going to create this week?